The classroom at Etheria Academy was buzzing with its usual ambient noise, a mixture of clicking, humming, and faint chattering in languages from all over the galaxy. Etheria Academy was not just any school, it was the most prestigious educational institution across the known universe, where promising young minds, no matter what system they hailed from, gathered to learn, share, and innovate. Each student in the classroom represented a different alien species, a testament to the diversity that the Academy prided itself on. A towering Zornian with transparent skin sat to one side, slowly absorbing nutrients from a vial that emitted a soft luminescent glow. On the opposite end of the room was a Carathian, whose 6 limbs were currently folded in a meditative state as they quietly focused their multiple sets of eyes on the lecturer. The room itself was specially designed with seats of varying sizes and shapes, each customized to accommodate the particular requirements of each species. The Academy was known for its state-of-the-art accommodations, and this classroom was no different, perfectly tailored to ensure comfort and functionality for all who attended. In the midst of this exotic scene sat Amy, the only human student in the class, her presence almost mundane compared to the flamboyant displays of alien biology around her. With her short auburn hair and simple academy uniform, she appeared somewhat out of place, physically smaller, and far less conspicuous compared to the colorful array of scales, tentacles, and bioluminescence that surrounded her. Amy had joined Etheria Academy as part of a special exchange program initiated between Earth and the Intergalactic Council. Humans, though still relatively new on the galactic stage, had been making strides in proving their worth and unique qualities, and Amy was one of the first to represent her species at this renowned institution. Despite being the only human, Amy had adapted well. Her curiosity and persistence endeared her to some, while baffling others who struggled to comprehend her insistence on simplicity over their advanced and often convoluted approaches. Today was the day of Professor Valnock's lecture on gravitonium, a rare material that played a vital role in powering much of the universe's most advanced technology. The entire class had been eagerly anticipating this session, and the air was filled with palpable excitement. Gravitonium was a mystery to many, known for its dense molecular structure and incredible weight. Manipulating it was not only an academic challenge but also a way of demonstrating one's command of the underlying principles of physics. Professor Valnock, a tall and slender Bracarian with an elongated body covered in segmented plates, glided to the front of the class. His 8 eyes, positioned in 2 vertical rows, gave him an almost omniscient appearance as he looked across the room. His voice, resonant and deep, vibrated through the air as he spoke. "Welcome, students, to today's highly anticipated demonstration," he began, gesturing with 2 of his 6 arms as his segmented fingers moved fluidly. Gravitonium, a material whose properties have perplexed and fascinated scientists across galaxies, will be the focus of our practical study today. You have read the theories, reviewed the equations, and today you will witness the physical challenge of manipulating this incredible substance. Behind Professor Valnock, a robotic arm lowered a large, cubic block onto a reinforced platform at the center of the room. The cube, shimmering with a metallic sheen, was about 1 meter in each dimension and seemed to absorb the light around it, its surface exuding an aura of incredible density. The robotic arm, although powerful, moved deliberately and slowly, as though burdened by the weight of the object. This, Professor Valnock continued, his voice rising slightly in pitch as though to emphasize the point, is a 1-meter cube of pure gravitonium. The density of this material is such that it cannot be moved without advanced technological assistance, and even then, it is a formidable challenge. He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the expressions of his students. Many of them were nodding, their various appendages twitching or curling in acknowledgement. Amy looked on with a focused gaze, her curiosity piqued. She had heard of gravitonium before, but seeing it in person, especially in such quantity, was something she hadn't expected. It was hard to describe, but the cube seemed heavy just by looking at it. It had an undeniable presence that made her wonder just how dense it actually was. "I will now demonstrate our mechanical aid for today," Professor Valnock said, gesturing to a sleek device that hovered over the gravitonium cube. This exoskeletal manipulator has been calibrated to use telekinetic pulses for the purposes of lifting and relocating gravitonium. The challenge, of course, lies in the fact that gravitonium's density is constantly shifting due to the nature of its atomic structure. With the press of a button, the device sprang to life, emitting a low hum as it extended mechanical tendrils that began to wrap around the cube. The hum grew louder, reverberating through the room, and students watched intently as the machine struggled, the tendrils tightening and vibrating with visible strain. Slowly, very slowly, the cube began to lift, but it was clear from the shuddering of the apparatus that this task was pushing it to its limits. The cube was elevated a mere few inches before Professor Volnok deactivated the device, the cube falling back onto the platform with a dull thud that echoed throughout the room. "As you can see," he said, his voice calm but tinged with a hint of satisfaction, "even our most advanced machinery finds it difficult to manipulate gravitonium." He turned to face his students, his eyes gleaming with intellectual challenge. "Now, who among you wishes to test your skill with gravitonium?" he asked, his segmented fingers curling into a gesture of invitation. There was an uneasy shifting among the students. The Zornian, whose name was Glarn, gave a slow shake of his bulbous head. The Kirathian Shuriak unfolded two of his limbs but then thought better of it, retracting them again. The rest of the class remained silent, each of them eyeing the cube with a mixture of intrigue and intimidation. Then, from the middle row, a hand shot up. It was Amy. She had been carefully observing the demonstration, her eyes locked on the cube, as if trying to calculate something. Professor Volnok turned his gaze to her, his eyes narrowing slightly in what could only be described as curiosity. "Ah, Miss Amy, our human representative," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You wish to attempt the task?" A murmur spread through the classroom. Amy knew what they were thinking. Humans were still seen as a bit of an enigma by many of the students here. Their reputation as Deathworlders creatures evolved from a planet full of dangerous conditions was a curious contradiction to their otherwise fragile appearances. And now Amy, the smallest and least conspicuous of them all, was volunteering to lift a block of gravitonium. Amy stood up, her heart pounding slightly, but she kept her expression calm. She knew she might fail after all. This wasn't exactly something humans were known to excel at. But she also knew that humans were often underestimated, and that was exactly why she wanted to try. She approached the platform, her steps confident, her gaze locked on the cube. As she reached it, she knelt beside it, assessing it up close. The material seemed almost unreal. The way it absorbed the light made it look like a void, and she could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on her senses. Amy wrapped her arms around the cube, adjusting her grip. She remembered her training back on Earth. She had worked on cars with her father, lifting engines and heavy equipment, and she knew how to use her body to its full potential. She shifted her feet, taking a deep breath, and focused. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. With a grunt of effort, Amy tightened her grip and began to lift. At first, nothing happened, and she felt the strain in her muscles. But she adjusted her stance, planting her feet more firmly, and pulled again, harder this time. Slowly, very slowly, the cube began to rise. It wasn't much, just a few centimeters off the platform, but it was enough. Gasps echoed throughout the room, and Professor Volnok's eyes widened, all 8 of them blinking in unison. Amy could feel the weight more than she had ever lifted before, but she held it there for a moment longer before gently lowering it back down. The cube hit the platform with a solid thud, and Amy stood up, wiping her brow, her face flushed from the effort. She looked around at her classmates, who were staring at her in stunned silence. Even Glarn, who had remained mostly stoic, looked visibly impressed, his transparent skin shifting colors. Professor Volnok cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Well," he began, his voice slightly unsteady for the first time that Amy could remember, "it appears we have underestimated the human capacity for physical exertion." A wave of murmurs spread through the class once again, this time tinged with admiration rather than skepticism. Amy smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over her. She wasn't the strongest in the room, not by a long shot, but she had just proven something that humans, despite their apparent fragility, had a strength that came from somewhere deeper, a resilience that others might not understand until they saw it in action. As Amy returned to her seat, she could hear the whispered questions from her classmates. How had she done it? What kind of training did humans undergo? Did all humans have this kind of strength? Professor Valnok, meanwhile, seemed to be considering something, his eyes still on Amy. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is more to learn from humans than we have previously considered. Miss Amy, your demonstration today has been most enlightening. Amy smiled again, this time a little wider as she nodded to the professor. She knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more that humans could share with the galaxy, and she was determined to keep showing it, one challenge at a time. The days that followed Amy's demonstration became a whirlwind of curiosity and unexpected attention. Word of her feat spread through Etheria Academy like a meteorite streaking through the atmosphere, swift, bright, and impossible to ignore. Students from other classes, and even some professors, were drawn to her story, fascinated by the human strength that had managed to defy the assumptions of so many. The first morning after the demonstration, Amy walked into the classroom feeling a bit apprehensive. She knew her classmates would be curious, but she hadn't anticipated the reaction she was about to receive. The moment she stepped into the room, she was greeted by an unusual sight. Her classmates were all gathered in small clusters, whispering animatedly in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally flicking in her direction. Glarn the Zornian waved her over with one of his slender limbs, his skin glowing a soft shade of green, a color she had come to learn indicated curiosity. Amy approached, her steps a little cautious. "Amy, how did you lift it?" Glarn asked, his voice a low gurgle, the kind that could easily be drowned out by the ambient sounds of the classroom. Before she could answer, Shuriak the Carathian interjected with his multiple eyes glistening in the artificial light of the room. "Yes, I have been wondering the same thing. Your body does not appear to have the musculature of a typical strength-oriented species. Was it some sort of human trick?" Amy smiled, though she could sense their genuine interest beneath the skepticism. It wasn't a trick, really. On Earth, we call it physical training. You see, I used to help my father fix cars, and that involved a lot of heavy lifting. We humans may not look strong, but we train our muscles to handle weight over time, and our bodies adapt. Glarn's skin shifted from green to a soft shade of blue, indicating fascination. "So it is all about repetition and adaptation?" "Exactly," Amy nodded, her gaze shifting between her classmates. She realized that what was common knowledge on Earth was completely foreign to them. Most of her peers came from species that relied on technology, telekinesis, or natural biological advantages, whether it was their multiple limbs, built-in exoskeletons, or levitational abilities. The concept of deliberately putting oneself through strenuous activities just to build physical strength was something that they found both perplexing and intriguing. As the discussion continued, Professor Valnok entered the classroom, his presence instantly quieting the room. His elongated figure moved smoothly, his segmented body shifting effortlessly as he glided to the front of the class. His 8 eyes scanned the room, pausing momentarily on Amy before he began the lesson. "Students, today we shall continue our study of gravitonium. But before we proceed, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the demonstration by Miss Amy yesterday," he said, his deep voice resonating throughout the room. He gestured toward Amy, his segmented fingers extending in her direction. Her accomplishment was an excellent example of how different species have unique ways of overcoming challenges. It is a reminder that we must not limit our thinking to what is familiar, but rather, embrace the diverse strengths that each species brings. Amy felt a flush of warmth in her cheeks as her classmates turned to look at her, some with admiration, others with a mix of curiosity and respect. She gave a small nod in acknowledgement, though inwardly she felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. She had never intended to draw this much attention, but now that she had, she wanted to make the most of it. After the lecture, Professor Valnok approached her, his 8 eyes blinking in a slow, deliberate sequence. "Miss Amy, a word, if you please." Amy followed him to the side of the classroom, her curiosity piqued. The professor, usually reserved and somewhat intimidating, seemed uncharacteristically engaged, as if he had found something that genuinely intrigued him. "Miss Amy," he began, his voice a bit softer, "I must admit, I was quite surprised by your ability to lift the gravitonium. I have been teaching at Etheria Academy for many cycles, and I have never seen such an occurrence. I would like to understand more about this. Physical training you mentioned. Do you think it is something that could be taught to other species?" Amy hesitated for a moment, considering the question. The idea of teaching aliens how to lift weights and build muscle was certainly not something she had anticipated when she enrolled in the academy. But as she looked at Professor Valnok's expectant expression, she realized that this could be an opportunity not just for her, but for her entire species. "I think it could be taught," she said slowly. "It might need some adaptations for different species depending on their biology, but the basic principles should work for anyone." Professor Valnok nodded, his segmented body shifting slightly. "I see. In that case, I would like to propose something to you, Miss Amy. I would like you to conduct a demonstration for a broader audience, perhaps even a workshop, where you could introduce your methods to other students and faculty." Amy's eyes widened slightly. A workshop? Teaching alien students how to lift weights? The idea was both daunting and thrilling. She took a deep breath, nodding. "I'd be honored, Professor. I think it could be a great way to share more about human capabilities." "Excellent," Professor Valnok said, a hint of a smile touching his otherwise stern features. "I will make the necessary arrangements. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare yourself. You may find that many are eager to learn from you." As the professor moved away, Amy stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had come to Etheria Academy to learn, but now, it seemed, she was about to become a teacher in her own right. The next week was a blur of preparations. The academy provided Amy with everything she needed: weights, exercise equipment, and even a holographic display to help demonstrate human anatomy and muscle groups. She spent hours working with the academy's staff, explaining the basics of human physical training and designing exercises that could be adapted for different species. On the day of the workshop, the training hall was filled with students and faculty, all eager to see what the human had to share. The room was packed with an eclectic mix of species, some with exoskeletons, others with tentacles, some that hovered in the air, and others that were so large they had to crouch to fit inside. Amy felt a flutter of nervousness as she stood in front of the crowd, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice amplified by the hall's audio system. "Today I'm going to show you some of the methods we humans use to build physical strength. It's called strength training, and it involves using resistance like weights to make our muscles stronger over time." She gestured to a set of weights that had been placed on a platform beside her. For humans, this is a way of adapting to challenges. On Earth, we face all kinds of difficult situations, lifting heavy objects, moving things, even defending ourselves. Strength training helps us prepare for those challenges. Amy demonstrated a basic lift, explaining the importance of posture, breathing, and controlled movement. As she lifted the weight, she could see the eyes of the audience widening in surprise. For many of them, the idea of using one's body to overcome physical challenges was entirely new. Most of them had grown up relying on technology or biological abilities that humans simply didn't have. After her demonstration, Amy invited a few volunteers to try. Glarn, the Zornian, was the first to step forward. His transparent skin shifted to a deep shade of blue as he carefully approached the platform. Amy guided him through the process, adjusting his posture and showing him how to grip the weight. Remember, it's not about lifting with your arms alone, she said, her voice calm and encouraging. You need to use your legs, your core, your whole body works together. Glarn nodded, his focus intense, and slowly began to lift. The weight moved, and a murmur of amazement spread through the crowd. Glarn's skin shifted to a bright green, a color that Amy had come to recognize as pride. One by one, more students came forward. Suryak, the Carathian, who used his multiple limbs to stabilize himself. A towering Yelthian who had to use a modified set of weights due to his immense size, and even a delicate-looking Navaran, whose frail appearance belied a surprising determination. As each of them tried, Amy could see the excitement building in the room. This was more than just a physical exercise, it was a moment of connection, a shared experience that transcended their differences. The aliens were discovering something new about themselves, something they hadn't known they were capable of. Professor Valnak, who had been observing from the side, stepped forward as the session came to a close. His eyes were all focused on Amy, his expression one of deep respect. "Miss Amy," he said, his voice resonating through the hall, "you have shown us that strength comes in many forms. You have given us a glimpse into the resilience of the human spirit, and for that, we are grateful." The room erupted in applause, an odd mixture of clicking, humming, and other alien sounds that filled the air. Amy felt her heart swell with pride, her smile broadening as she looked out at the crowd. This was why she had come to Etheria Academy, not just to learn, but to share what it meant to be human. As the applause died down, students and faculty began to approach her, each with questions and comments. Some wanted to know more about human physiology, others asked about Earth and its challenges, and some simply wanted to thank her for sharing something so unique. Glarn approached her, his skin still a bright green. "Amy, I must admit, I did not expect to be able to lift the weight. I always thought that physical strength was beyond me." Amy smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not just about physical strength, Glarn. It's about challenging yourself, pushing your limits. And you did that today." Suryak nodded, his multiple eyes blinking in unison. "You have given us a new perspective, Amy. Perhaps there is more to be learned from your species than we previously thought." Amy looked around the room, her gaze taking in the diverse group of beings that surrounded her. She had come to Etheria Academy feeling like an outsider, but now, she felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't anticipated. She had shown them a part of her world, and in doing so, she had become a part of theirs. As the workshop came to an end, Professor Valnak approached her once more. "Miss Amy, I believe this is just the beginning. There is much more we can learn from one another. I would like to invite you to conduct a series of workshops and ongoing exchange of knowledge between species. Are you willing?" Amy felt a rush of excitement at the prospect. "I'd love to, Professor. I think we have a lot to share with each other." "Very well," Professor Valnak said, his segmented fingers clasping together in a gesture of approval. "I will make the necessary arrangements. This is a momentous opportunity for all of us." As the professor moved away, Amy stood there, her heart pounding with excitement and anticipation. She had come to Etheria Academy as a student, but now, she was something more, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what could be achieved when different species came together to share their knowledge and strengths. And as she looked around at her classmates, each of them still buzzing with excitement, she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take her and them far beyond anything they had imagined.